There is a very special kind of fear that most mainstream horror tropes just cannot recreate. I do get my fair share of jump scares from zombies, creepy nuns, and blood-soaked grotesque creatures, but at the end of the day, I know those are not real. But analog horror is what genuinely makes me look over my shoulder or get a little too anxious when the lights flicker. I do not even need to be in a dark room or create the right kind of spooky atmosphere when I'm watching one of these. It can be midday with sunlight pouring in from the window, and I will still feel unsettled in a way that makes me not want to stay alone. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Analog horror is a very niche subgenre, and I agree that it is not for everyone because sometimes we do need a nice bloodthirsty demon to be the star of the show. However, if you want to go a notch above and feel deeply disturbed by some seemingly normal happenings, I have so much to tell you about the world of analog horror. So in today's video, I will take you through some of my personal favorite entities from this genre. Maybe don't watch this all by yourself, okay? Alternates, the Mandela Catalog. Before I start, let me ask you something. Think of someone you are very close to, maybe a parent, a sibling, or even a friend. And now imagine that you come home from work one day to find them sitting at the kitchen table, but you feel the hair on your neck rising for some reason. Your fight or flight instinct gets activated out of the blue because you can see that the one before you is the same person you know and love, but something about them is just wrong, and you simply cannot point out what that is. And that, my friends, is what an alternate is. They are humanoid, otherworldly entities, and the series heavily implies that they are connected to biblical demons. They are capable of blending among humans because they are extremely skilled at mimicry. Some can take the form of specific people, while others appear as distorted, flawed impersonations. Of course, these doppelgangers do not just stay satisfied with imitation, because their larger goal is to eradicate humanity by psychologically torturing humans and driving them toward death. They can sometimes use direct force, but more often they prefer setting the game in motion so the victim breaks mentally. Alternates are associated with something called metaphysical awareness disorder, or MAD, and while the exact mechanics are intentionally vague, the idea is that they expose victims to information or fear that the fragile human mind cannot handle. They do not want to eat you, suck your blood, or torture you in the traditional monster movie way. Alternates want human beings gone, and you might disagree with me, but psychological warfare really is one of the scariest ways to go. These creatures have been around for a long time in the mythology of the series, because one of the most important figures is a false version of the archangel Gabriel. The series also rewrites biblical imagery in a deeply disturbing way, including references to Adam, Eve, Mary, Joseph, and the birth of Jesus. What is most disturbing is the implication that even sacred history may have been corrupted from the beginning. Now, just because they are evil entities does not mean their hierarchy is always straightforward. The show and fan discussions have used different terms over time, including doppelgangers, flawed impersonators, unspeakables, and tulpas. The doppelgangers are the near-perfect copies, the flawed impersonators are the distorted ones, and the unspeakables remain mysterious. Tulpas are especially creepy because they are connected to the idea of something imagined into existence. Did any of you have an invisible friend growing up, maybe? Ever wonder where that friend went after you finished school? The Intruder, the Mandela Catalog. Also known as Six, this guy is not a normal alternate. It is never fully explained what exactly he is, but he is not presented as a simple doppelganger at least. I want to clarify that right away. He may not be the only major threat in the series, but do not let that fool you. He is one of the most disturbing presences in the entire Mandela County nightmare. He can take on two major forms, and both are enough to make you want to sleep with one eye open. His most common form is that of a man with short, somewhat messy black hair, usually seen through television footage. How can you differentiate him from the scores of other men with black hair? Well, for one, they will not be giving you a bone-chilling smile out of the blue. His other form is that of a tall, pale figure in a dark hoodie or robe. The first thing he says in Intruder Alert is enough to ruin your night. I am inside your home. Look man, evil entity or not, I would freak out if I heard that from any normal person too, while I was chilling in my room. Six is linked to the abduction of thousands of children, including young Adam Murray. One summary of the series describes him as responsible for kidnapping more than 3,000 children, with the grief of those disappearances leading parents towards suicide. He was seen throughout the duration of an educational movie made by the Mandela County Child Endangerment Awareness Association, which is ironic in the worst possible way. Shortly after the tape aired, he kidnapped young Adam Murray, and the trauma destroyed Adam's family. The use of Ave Maria in the sequence makes everything even more horrifying. Think how painfully poetic that is, that one of the most sacred pieces of music associated with faith and sorrow plays while this creature destroys a household. It is one of the most disturbing scenes in the whole series because you simply do not associate that hymn with anything remotely similar or evil. In the Mandela Catalog Volume 333, he is also connected to Stanley from The Might of the Subconscious, a figure who tricks children into creating or inviting something terrible into their homes. Remember how I said tulpas can be linked to young children? Yep, he is a proud facilitator of that process. In later parts of the series, he also reveals a strange possessive side when he appears years later and asks Adam if he remembers his kidnapping. This creature does not just do his thing and get on with his life. He remembers everything, and he can come back anytime to make things worse. Gabriel, false angel, the Mandela Catalog. Every religion, every culture, and every civilization has one thing in common: the belief that someone out there is watching over us, a benevolent being who offers protection and guidance. And now, think about the fact that this entire idea was corrupted from the beginning. Gabriel is the main villain of the Mandela Catalog and one of the most powerful entities in its mythology. His fake form gives off the perfect image of an archangel with pristine white robes, wings, long soft blonde hair, and angelic facial features. Not even in your wildest dreams would you think that someone who looks like this can be the very opposite of what he tries to portray himself as. In his more sinister form, however, these angelic features are replaced with a disturbing expression, no wings, and a mouth stuck in a grimacing smile. The hair and white robe remain, but the other changes are enough to make you want to erase yourself from existence. At the start of Overthrown, the real Gabriel disappears after giving the message to the shepherds about the arrival of Christ, and is then replaced by the false version, who later appears before Mary and claims to be the one true Savior. So it is implied that the holy story people know may have been manipulated from the beginning. He also appears in Joseph's dream and says, "I will fool the shepherds. I will know their greatest fear. I will know your greatest fear." He was not just threatening Joseph here. It was more like a promise because he knew he would be successful. The series also hints that this false Gabriel is Satan in disguise, connecting the idea to the biblical line that Satan can appear as an angel of light. Gabriel is actually my favorite entity in this franchise, because the fear factor with him does not just come from how he looks or his ability to deceive. He has probably been operating since before written history. Think about every prayer that went unanswered, every act of faith that reaped no results, and every religious war ever fought. Was he behind all of that? Does the religious angle make Gabriel more terrifying to you? Because I sure as hell think there is something inherently despicable about horror that reaches into faith. The Moon, Local 58. If you have watched Local 58, you know just how well it works for this niche because of its hyper-realism and not so subtle social commentary. It is truly one of the more disturbing series of shorts I have ever watched, and I have not really gone back for a second viewing. In Show for Children, Weather Service, and Sky Watching, one of the most unassuming things in our world turns into a deadly antagonist, the moon itself. It was a brilliant idea to make Earth's satellite one of the scariest things you will ever witness on screen because, again, the moon is usually associated with comfort, beauty, romance, and calm. I mean, it has played an important role in setting the mood for many other horror shows, but it is rarely the main threat itself, right? In Local 58, the moon becomes connected to a force that harms or brainwashes people who look at it directly. In Show for Children, the moon is initially shown with an expressive, grinning face. Then the smile disappears, which is not entirely a bad thing, since it was already really creepy to look at. It then wears a haunting, placid expression with visible eyes. But it gets worse in Weather Service, where a warning interrupts the Local 58 broadcast, courtesy of the County Weather Service. This alert indicates that a meteorological event will last until morning and strongly advises people against looking at it with their naked eyes. It soon gets upgraded to a danger alert, and people are simply asked not to look at the night sky at all. Then the broadcast seemingly gets hijacked, and the new message has a more relaxed tone, claiming that the event is safe to view. Another message even says, "Go outside now." It is clear that the second broadcast is anything but innocent, but the exact nature nature of the harm is never fully explained. We do not get a clean depiction of what happens either. We just hear distant screams before the shot cuts away. And that is why I like Local 58. It does not spoon-feed you or tell you exactly what you should be afraid of. One of the final messages claims that something is in the light, and the corrupted broadcast seems to imply that the moon has entered or infected the mind of whoever is speaking. Are these the ramblings of a troubled mind or something far more sinister? Oh, and how could I forget skywatching, where the moon's surface appears disturbingly biological and wrong. Forget the high-definition images from NASA, this one is going to stick with you far longer. The Iris, Gemini Home Entertainment. In this series, Earth faces an extraterrestrial invasion linked to the Iris, a sentient rogue planet resembling an eye. Think of it as a parasitic planet that wants to manipulate the solar system for a large takeover. It is sentient, cruel, and tied to the infection of other planets and life forms. The scariest part is that the Iris is not just a monster floating in space. It is a cosmic intelligence that communicates, spreads influence, and uses living systems as tools. It is not fully explained when the Iris entered the solar system, but the series suggests that it has already interfered with major planetary bodies and is connected to strange transformations across space. The Iris eventually shifts its influence toward Earth through parasitic organisms and diseases. In the wider lore, the Iris uses interplanetary transport to send its spawn, parasites, and diseases across the solar system, particularly to Earth. So what exactly is deep root disease? I won't spoil everything for you, but if you have not watched Gemini Home Entertainment yet, you really are missing out on some of the best cosmic horror imagery in analog horror. But the basic idea is that roots infect organisms and create bulbs that eventually become sprouts. Later stages can transform human hosts into grotesque, string-like masses. Gardeners, woodcrawlers, fake people, lights, and nature's mockery are hostile organisms or phenomena tied to the Iris and its ecosystem. A few of the videos in the series are specifically meant to instruct viewers how to defend themselves or hide from these creatures, but the unease comes from the fact that the instructions themselves may not always be trustworthy. Gemini Home Entertainment portrays the Iris as a living planetary threat with biological and cosmic implications. As much as I love Alien, even a xenomorph feels almost manageable next to a planet-sized intelligence that can infect entire worlds. Woodcrawlers, Gemini Home Entertainment. We only catch a few glimpses of these creatures in the series, and the most we can glean from that is that they look like arachnid monsters. Remy Abode made a very deliberate choice here with how he used them in a hide-and-seek fashion, and also with the decision to use complete silence in many of their scenes. These things are extremely skilled hunters, capable of moving through almost any terrain without making a sound. You know how sometimes we say silence is the loudest noise? Woodcrawlers embody that sentiment with a dash of existential dread. They are quite big in size, but we do not always see them long enough to know exactly how big they are. Some appear tall enough to dominate a doorway or outdoor space, while others seem lower and more animal-like. Their MO is to burrow underneath houses that typically have large families and then launch attacks from beneath or around the home. The series describes woodcrawlers as stealthy hunters that prefer to live in burrows underneath homes with large human families, where swarms can adapt more easily. It also seems like they can mimic or steal sounds, because one of the most chilling lines connected to them suggests that the screams people hear may not belong to the living anymore. In Home Invasion Help, the format begins like a safety guide with instructions meant to tell viewers about these creatures and how they can survive. And soon enough, you realize that the instructions are not really helping you in the comforting way you expect. Woodcrawlers are not scary just because they can kill you. They are scary because they turn the home into the hunting ground. Under the floorboards, in the dark corners, behind the sounds you thought you recognized, something may already be waiting. The Boiled One, Dr. Nowhere. I want to preface this by saying that the Boiled One phenomenon is one of the few analog horror videos that made me quite uncomfortable for hours after watching, and not exactly in a jump scare way. You know how when you taste something unpleasant, it lingers on your tongue for much longer, as if your taste buds are experiencing it for the first time all over again? That way. It's a very visceral description, I know, but I honestly want to warn the people watching this video to collect themselves properly before watching this one. The boiled one, also classified as PHEN 228, is hard to describe in a way that conveys exactly how wrong it looks. It is tall, lanky, humanoid, and has raw, crimson, freshly scalded looking skin. Its head looks disfigured, almost like how metal objects lose their shape when exposed to extreme heat, and its mouth is always open, full of teeth. It also has wiry strands from its head that look like hair that has been electrified at least 5 times. The series tells us that if anyone sees this thing's face, they may develop an everlasting memory of it, and I cannot agree more. This is just something you cannot unsee, even if you really want to. It is the personification of the whole living rent-free in your mind idea, and if anyone falls asleep after seeing the face and memorizing the features, they risk falling into a pseudo-coma-like state. Despite all this, the continuity suggests that the harm caused by the boiled one is not immediately lethal. It is arguably worse. It can leave people conscious, aware, and paralyzed. In the creature's own words, it promises to watch over the victim forever. Think of the worst possible kind of stalking and give it a red, scalded face, and this is what you are left with. Despite being this really nasty looking thing from hell, not literally, the boiled one actually has a plushie dedicated to him. A gentle reminder, this is not the kind of plushie you want to gift anyone. The Mimic Trucidatum Carnis, Vita Carnis. This series was created by Canadian surrealist Darian Quilloy, and mainly revolves around the emergence of creepy, fleshy creatures that have been linked to cult activity and a larger biological ecosystem. The Latin phrase Trucidatum Carnis is generally understood within the fandom as butchered flesh, which immediately tells you what kind of nightmare we are dealing with. As you have probably guessed by now, mimics are predators that target human flesh. Juvenile mimics can survive on smaller animals, but adult mimics strongly prefer human prey. They look very similar to how a human would look after being skinned completely, with exaggerated features for dramatic effect. These include extremely long arms, thin fingers, flat noses, sunken eyes, and a hunched posture. Their mouths contain far more teeth than a normal human mouth, mainly arranged for biting and tearing flesh. What is interesting about them is that the more humans they consume, the more they begin to resemble real people. They can still be spotted through obvious anatomical differences that no amount of flesh eating can fully bypass. I hope. But they can reasonably blend in with crowds if they wear baggy clothing. But what you need to know about them is that they are extremely predatory. Their instincts will remind you of those nature documentaries where the tiger or lioness waits and calculates how to attack one unsuspecting deer. Mimics prefer to attack humans while they are asleep or weakened because that is simply efficient hunting, but they can also distract or frighten prey into near submission before attacking. This planning also involves the element of surprise, as they sometimes hide inside hollow furniture to attack at the best moment. If you're wondering whether there is any way to defend yourself against these things, then I have good news and bad news. The good news is that firearms can work against juveniles and adults. The bad news is that stronger or older mimics require far more precise targeting. So if you have a gun, you better hope you have good aim too. The Harvester, Vita Carnis. Known scientifically in the series as Congregator Carnis or Gathering Flesh, this creature looks like a fleshy, overgrown plant with a main bulb and shallow tendrils reaching into the ground. It has a darker shade of red, almost crimson, and honestly looks so odd and bulbous that you may involuntarily shake your head just seeing it. A harvester does not always discriminate when it comes to prey, and occasionally, even a human can face the misfortune of becoming its meal. In one of the more disturbing incidents discussed in the series, a mother and child become victims, and the government response is presented in a way that feels disturbingly inadequate. I read a fan theory that said the harvester may have attacked the younger victim first to lure out more victims through screams for help. Now, I will warn you to be careful while watching this episode because it is really gruesome, and the scenes do not always follow the usual analog horror habit of leaving everything to the imagination. You may never again want to be close to tall grass after watching. Harvesters otherwise mostly stick to larger animals like wolves and bears. They are basically carnivorous plants, but they demonstrate more intelligent behavior than most documented plants. One of the most interesting things they do is leave the remains of prey to get absorbed into the soil and boost plant growth in the surrounding area, which in turn can attract more prey. And you must have noticed that I mentioned larger animals because the harvester seems capable of assessing whether nourishment from smaller animals is worth the effort. That is why you can find birds and rabbits moving around harvesters without a care in the world. They can also move from one place to another if they feel that they are not getting enough to eat. But this process is quite slow. The way these creatures attack and kill their prey is also fascinating and terrifying. They have tendrils that can detect blood and move toward prey, while other tendrils do the heavier lifting. These contain spines that behave like traps, and they can inject venom that attacks the nervous system, causing paralysis, while also affecting the blood, so the prey bleeds out more quickly. Lifeform, Backrooms web series and 2026 movie. Any discussion on analog horror is incomplete without Backrooms. This is like the Star Wars space opera equivalent of this genre, you know? And just in case you have not watched the original short, I really recommend that you go in cold without looking anything up, because if you can stomach this particular brand of horror, this will be a whole experience for you. Canonically, there is not a lot of clean information available about the lifeform, except what the web series shows and what fans have pieced together. It is a hostile entity inside the Backrooms, often described by fans as a bacterial or vine-like organism, even though it is nearly human-sized or larger in appearance, so bacterial is probably not the best visual description. Its anatomy resembles a bunch of black wires tangled up into a humanoid, vine-like shape with long arms that reach toward the ground. It seems to wander through the Backrooms, and it has not been firmly established how conscious or intelligent it really is. It can also be inactive at times and form nest-like structures with vines similar to those that make up its body. However, if humans get close enough or make noise, it can wake up and attack. It can produce and mimic sounds, especially when detecting and hunting prey, which we see across Kane Pixel's found footage videos. It is also persistent once it starts chasing, often matching human speed and making strange, crying-like sounds. It seems to have impressive stamina too, because it does not stop until it loses sight of the victim or catches up for good. In the 2026 film, the creature design appears to have been adapted for a more cinematic creature horror presentation. Some fans of the original series have mixed feelings about changes like this, because there is always a risk that the more clearly you show something, the less frightening it becomes. But honestly, the core concept is intact enough that it should not matter too much what it looks like. What makes the lifeform scary is not just its shape, you know. It is the environment around. The Backrooms represent a particular kind of paranoia and anxiety. Those god-awful yellow walls bring about an immediate sense of unease and claustrophobia, and it almost feels like an uncomfortable emotion that we recognize but cannot vocalize. Still life. Backrooms. The lifeform is not the only horror lurking in those unending, dimly lit corridors. Still lifes are strange entities created by the Backrooms, seemingly as failed or uncanny attempts to copy other forms of life. Many fans believe that the Backrooms itself is a bigger, hostile system, which happens to be my next point, and that it tried to sequence or copy human beings from the existing universe. I personally think that the term still life itself may refer to something stuck between stillness and life, or even between stillborn and living. But this is my own interpretation. There is no official hidden meaning assigned to the name yet. We see them clearly in found footage number 3, when one keeps following Ravi and ultimately chases him. Still lifes have a habit of running after anyone they see and making loud, unpleasant noises. We do not get a perfectly clear look at them in the web series, but from what is available, we can gather that they look distorted but humanoid. The uneven anatomy and misshapen heads seem to point to why they have such aggressive reflexes and poor intelligence or motor control. In the movie, they appear more humanoid except for external features like oddly shaped hands. Interestingly, while they may be sampled from human bodies, their internal structure does not work like a real person's. Some descriptions and fan notes mention strange white stuffing-like material, which makes them feel more like failed props made by reality itself. The ability of these creatures to comprehend complex thoughts and feelings is still debated because they do seem to take some pleasure in taunting prey. All I can say is that if you ever find yourself in the Backrooms, just be ready for the sprint of your life. Backrooms complex as a hostile system. Other than the obvious creatures we have discussed so far, I also want to talk about how the Backrooms itself seems to be a system that draws victims in and refuses to let them out easily. The whole setting of the video and the movie is extremely basic, and maybe that is why it is so innately disturbing. Endless corridors, yellowed walls, flickering fluorescent lights with their signature hum, and the implied smell of damp carpet. There are no windows, no normal exits, just rooms that keep leading into more rooms. I would rather choose hell with all its fire and demons over this, because at least there I know I am going to get fried in a giant cauldron, have my soul tortured, or whatever. In the Backrooms, there is no saying what you might encounter with the next few steps, or what might come up to you on its own without any invitation. And if you hear something nearby, that is worse than good, because whatever that was, it probably heard you too. But whatever it is, whether a life form or a still life, it is easier to process because it has a shape, and you can at least try to outrun it. But can you say the same for the Backrooms as a whole? How long can someone possibly keep walking and running to find a way out before their mind breaks down and they realize there may be no out? I think the reason why the structure itself is so uniquely terrifying is that most horror situations put people in a clearly dangerous place, like a haunted house, a dark forest, or a crime scene. The Backrooms are dangerous because they are not your regular spooky locale. They look like somewhere you might have to walk through routinely, like the back of an office building, the hallway of a closed store, or an old stairwell. It is unremarkable commercial architecture turned infinite and hostile. Here you have one of the dullest spaces imaginable, and it is implied that if you slip through the wrong wall, you might land in an endless version from which you can never leave. I get the creeps every time I have to walk through the dusty corridor leading up to a strange room, and I have to thank Backrooms for branding that dread into me. The Painter and Mona D. Lanius. The Painter. I am going to be stepping into a different territory altogether now, and if you have any idea about this series, you will know why. Please know that I am not trying to defend the way some very sensitive topics were handled in The Painter, and this inclusion is more about exploring how, even within analog horror, more traditional slasher tropes can be incorporated to skyrocket the shock value. If you are expecting the same tone of terror that I have talked about for so long, just know that The Painter is not subtle. Whether that makes it a genuine slasher, analog horror, or just something very visceral for shock value is a debate the community has been having for a while now. Inspired by slasher films and extreme horror, the murders escalate in brutality with each episode, and the series does not flinch from extremely upsetting subject matter, which is where a portion of fans drew a hard line. Quite understandably so. Mona D. Lanius and William Bill Collins are the main villains here. A duo of unhinged serial killers with a very strange MO. They leave behind disturbing paintings of their victims at crime scenes to taunt the police. Mona is described as someone with a deeply horrific background, and she and Bill grow into killers whose violence becomes increasingly ritualistic and theatrical. According to Mona, she did what she did because a supernatural creature called the Red Man made her do it using the machine. She ultimately dies after being stabbed during a prison conflict, but the murders continue afterward. That is why some fans believe her theory about the Red Man may have been true, pointing to some kind of supernatural force behind the human killers. The Painter is not for everyone on this list, and honestly, it is not for most people at all. But if you are still hungry for the complete abandonment of restraint, this is where analog horror takes a left turn into something so ugly that no one can comfortably defend it. Locust, Dr. Nowhere's TOE. If you have ever flinched while watching 3D movies and want to spice it up by experiencing that same momentary dread again, look no further. The Locust is somewhere between a humanoid man-eater and an actual locust, and it has a very interesting way of marking its victims. It attacks by breaking through screens and then proceeds to have a nice hot meal. However, it is indicated that it does not necessarily consume the outer body of its victims and may focus on what's inside, because one of the chilling ideas associated with it is that the body can appear untouched while everything inside is gone. The Locust has stick-like limbs that almost resemble broken pencils and a nightmarish humanoid face with hollow eyes. It is not certain if the Locust actually has the mind of a child or only pretends to be childlike, which is seen in the way it speaks. When it appears on television, one distinctive feature is that it stands in a room decorated with vintage wallpaper. Its appearances are not limited to just television though. and it can break through device screens with its stringy limbs. You might think that it is like a locust after all, so maybe hiding or outrunning it will save your life. But no, this thing will hunt you down no matter where you are. The safety precautions instruct the viewer to turn off whatever device they are using if the locust turns up on the screen, and to destroy or discard the device if necessary. However, if the worst happens and the locust still comes through, the better option is to run instead of hiding. Driving away quickly is also preferable because this creature is deceptively fast for its size. Unless you're an Olympic track and field athlete, it is really unlikely that you will escape it on your feet alone. It might be a weird thing to say in the context of such horror shows, but this is one of the tamer creatures we have discussed so far. I still do not encourage you to take it lightly though. Smiling entities, smile tape victims, the smile tapes. As human beings, we are instinctively conditioned to trust certain actions, and smiling is one of them. Of course, not all smiles are related to happiness or even genuine, which is the case in point, but overall, it is one of the first meaningful facial expressions even babies make without understanding what it really implies. Many horror tropes have weaponized this to give us nightmares, and the smile tapes created by Patoriku is one of them. It has quite a simple premise, but the VHS-inspired aesthetic that combines elements of emergency broadcast footage and makeshift clinical settings has made this series memorable within analog horror circles. It starts with a black market drug being sold to numerous people, who then become manic and unable to control their laughter or smiling. All this is tied to an extraterrestrial microbe that becomes connected to a fungal infection. Other, more dangerous effects include psychosis, uncontrollable violence, and facial deformities. Obviously, after continuous stages of increasing physical and neurological damage, the infection kills the people who consume it. But that is not all. After the host dies, spores can be released from the body and inhaled by others. This series fundamentally works as a pandemic story because the horror is biological and is documented through broadcasts, journal entities, and found footage style material. One victim, Sean Gomez, keeps a journal where he describes what it is like to suffer from the effects. He writes that his friends notice he is always smiling and assume he is happy, but he wants them to know he is anything but happy. He is going through unspeakable agony. I already talked about how the act of smiling in horror hits very hard, because it is something we are otherwise inclined to trust. Sure, there have been many cases where mania has driven people to violence, with or without the impact of drugs, but the added smile factor here places this series on a whole other level. The works on this list target a very primal corner of our minds, and refuse to be shaken off long after the credits have rolled. We do not even realize just how close they hit home until the point when they actually do, and then we scramble to find a way to manage that nagging anxiety and reassure ourselves that everything is okay. It is absolutely fascinating how one genre can have so many different interpretations, and that is exactly why I love horror so much. I get scared too, I won't lie, but I just cannot leave behind that urge to explore more and more worlds out there, even though whatever inhabits these worlds would gladly tear me apart. That is it for today, folks. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Stay safe out there.